I came out as non-binary last December, identifying as bigender in particular. On top of every other obstacle in life, this year has been a constant struggle to figure myself out. I don't have any close friends who are queer, and I'm deeply introverted anyway, so even though I don't regret coming out or being who I am, I can't deny it's resulted in a greater sense of loneliness. Gaming has been the most impactful form of art to me ever since I was a child, so naturally I searched for any video game I could resonate with when it came to identity. In this case, the Life is Strange series was a no-brainer. I mean, it's basically known as a queer rite of passage, and with my first Pride Month on the horizon, it'd be quite the celebration. Its latest entry, True Colors, seemed to be much less beloved than its predecessors, but that didn't stop me. If there was any game that was gonna convince me to break through, it was bound to be the one starring a fellow Asian queer. And while I have since completed the iconic original story, I have to admit, I still have a soft spot for True Colors. I get why it was divisive though. At its core, Life is Strange is a dark supernatural drama. The original is especially renowned for its mystery. Each of those terms is indeed applicable to True Colors, but I prefer to describe it as a slice of life and a character study. The fact of the matter is, this is not the Life is Strange that fans are accustomed to, so therefore, the reduced enthusiasm was inevitable. We've covered many instances of similar backlash. It happens all the time in entertainment, and it'll likely happen again with double exposure. Personally speaking, I love True Colors just as much as the original, and I love them both for their own, equally valid reasons. The last decade has sung more than enough praise for Max and Chloe, so allow me to introduce you to Alexandra Chen. Alex is a supernatural version of an empath. She experiences the intense emotions of others to the point of reading their thoughts and mirroring their actions. This has been a burden for an already troubled upbringing, but thanks to her estranged brother, Gabe, she is given a clean slate at the small mining town of Haven Springs. Before she knows it, however, the reunion is cut short by a corporate conspiracy that can only be exposed by learning to control her powers. Let's leave it at that for now. I'm just gonna be blunt. I would not recommend True Colors if its mystery is your priority. As much as it has potential, its conclusion is unfortunately rushed. This is honestly my only gripe with the story, and it's a pretty big one. As I alluded to though, this is less of a mystery game and more of a slice of life. Haven isn't just picturesque for the eyes alone. It is the perfect illustration of everything True Colors stands for. Its vibrancy reflects its colorful citizens, its serenity personifies the innocence of their antics, and its modesty embodies the humility of their struggles. The soundtrack is another crucial ingredient. Kings of Leon didn't even finish, and I'll still remember it forever. The music is so heavily incorporated into the narrative and setting that the atmosphere wouldn't be the same without it. I found myself content just being at Haven and getting to hang out with everyone. By far the best example I can give is the LARP, or as I learned it stood for, Live Action Role Playing. To the townsfolk, it is a heartfelt endeavor to cheer up a little kid. To the player, we are that little kid infatuated by this enamoring tribute to RPGs. No joke, the LARP is one of my favorite chapters in any video game, period. It's the peak of the franchise as far as I'm concerned. That being said, I am well aware of the optics. People in general tend to dislike it when their favorite series gets more lighthearted, because lighthearted is perceived as childish or immature. Again, not my first rodeo. So it is imperative to clarify that True Colors isn't full of filler. It isn't fun and games for the sake of it. In fact, it's often for the sake of healing. Empathy, grief, and mental health are three themes that are typically conveyed by being dark and supernatural, if not outright psychological horror. While that is proven to be effective, I also think it's valuable to see them in a more grounded, intimate manner, where there's no escaping how real these issues are, where the supernatural is a means to an end, rather than a means of portrayal. And True Colors does a magnificent job at retaining an uplifting tone while never sugarcoating reality. That is a fine line to walk, but it has no problem balancing. It highlights how even the mundane can provide comfort and relief. Yes, its main story may end on an underwhelming note, but the overall quality of writing is captivating. Even the social media is well written. I got several good chuckles from how accurate it is. I'm usually not the type to indulge in all the minor flavor text in a video game, but here it's a pleasure. There's so much evolving minutia that never feels distracting or like it's slowing down the pace. I was fascinated by how many secrets there are that serve no purpose other than an extra tidbit of lore or a sliver of banter. But that relentless attention to detail is what brings the setting to life. You sense its history, you grasp its culture, and most importantly, you feel it's being lived in. It's this meticulous world building that enriches the other half of True Colors. Character study. The characters are unquestionably the greatest assets in Haven. From the childish fear of monsters to the elderly fear of memory, Alex will have to experience it if she intends on making a difference. With that comes a lot of tough decisions, but you may be disappointed to find that the consequences don't really affect the ongoing narrative. While it does lack those stakes, what makes a choice compelling isn't how it affects you. To me, it's the nuance that intrigues, and there's plenty to go around. It wasn't uncommon for me to debate with myself because what seems quote-unquote right may be detrimental to that character, or at times, even Alex herself. Nuance is fundamental to their storylines as a whole. What they're feeling may not be considered quote-unquote right either, but it doesn't mean they're in the wrong. That sort of complexity is what makes a human being. The writers were especially skilled at endearing the main characters. Gabe alone is a masterclass by himself. In a single afternoon, they don't just make the player attached to Gabe, they establish his bonds with everyone. The effect he has on the community is palpable no matter where you turn. But of course, the quintessential result is the protagonist herself. Each and every praise I've just sung can be attributed to Alex. She is what ties everything together. I could not have asked for a better representation. She is a protagonist with clear, relatable flaws, yet flaws that ultimately accentuate how empowering she is. I had post-game depression because I missed her. I went back and did a 100% playthrough just to spend more time with her. I want to read the spin-off novels because that still wasn't enough. I'm even considering getting the same tattoo. I love her appearance, her fashion, her personality, her sense of humor, her taste in music, her voice acting, her singing voice. I love her to pieces. Alex is an inspiration to me, despite everything. And I do mean everything. Before I continue raving, it would be disrespectful if I didn't acknowledge a recent controversy surrounding this game. True Colors was plagued by behind-the-scenes issues that were uncovered by IGN back in April. This article went severely under the radar, but as its title may suggest, it deserves to be remembered. For starters, franchise publisher Square Enix was initially adamant about keeping Alex's bisexuality a secret. Not because they wanted a pleasant surprise, but because they didn't want Life is Strange to be known as the gay game. As laughable as the irony is, the hypocrisy is infuriating. So it's okay to rely on queer money, but it's not okay to be proud of it? Sure. After its creators Dontnod moved on to other original projects, development of the series was moved over to Deck 9, simply because they were its lowest bidder. Or at least, that's how some of its alumni were made to feel. I wouldn't doubt it. Square is the same publisher who charged $60 for a 10-hour game that's mostly dialogue. That price tag was the biggest criticism of True Colors, but thankfully they were humbled into frequent generous discounts. To be fair, it's not just Square Enix at fault, it's also the leadership at Deck 9. According to numerous employees, both current and former, the so-called leaders enabled a toxic work environment, including harassment, sexism, crunch culture, and disputes over the narrative. Suddenly, the abrupt ending makes a lot more sense, but this isn't about a game anymore. These are the lives of real people. I was eerily reminded of Activision Blizzard until I realized I don't have to go back that far. Look at the tens of thousands of layoffs, look at Tango Gameworks or the Helldivers fiasco. It's like the industry is obsessed with undermining the people who actually care about the games you love. Like seriously, bullying? Nazi symbolism? Just because you get to make money off your childhood hobby doesn't mean you don't have to grow up. Supposedly Deck 9 is in a much better state now, but after these harrowing details and the notoriously buggy remasters, I can't help but worry about the future of the IP. But hey, I'm just going off these reports. I'm not urging everyone to raise their pitchforks. I'm not trying to start a revolution here. As much as I'm skeptical of double exposure, I'm not gonna nitpick and be petty like certain fans are already doing. No, the reason why I'm bringing all of this up is that regardless of what you believe, when it comes to True Colors, all the stuff people have praised in the queer community was hard fought for. And I refuse to take that for granted. They were forced to remove a trans character. Who knows what else may have been cut? This video game, and most certainly Alex, would not exist the way they do without those marginalized developers who, despite everything, insisted on giving a shit. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for persevering. You gave me, as well as many others, the validation we really needed. The thing is, I've had my fair share of favorite characters. I make that as well known as I can, but Alex is different. Representation is one thing. This is serendipity. From our similar heritage, to being the same age, to working a similar job with a similar clientele with a similar outside view, to wearing a dark bracelet on our right wrist and a bright one on our left, to being the same exact height to my amusement and chagrin. And that's just superficial. There are so many specific ways that I relate to her that it is surreal. I may be making light of it now, But sincerely, I feel this intensely deep connection with her that I find difficult to properly articulate without this becoming a full-on therapy session. We don't need that, so I hope I'm able to convey even a fraction of my love for her. Alex has a variety of interests, many of which can be considered nerdy, but music is her primary creative outlet. What started as a hobby becomes a passion to rely on in order to tune out surrounding emotions and help process her own. This is most demonstrated by her journal, where she recounts traumatic experiences related to her powers, each of them eliciting a brief composition. Alex ends up using some of these lyrics for the credits theme, Every Wave, cementing her growth from these events. Although her first performance in the story directly follows her first outburst in Haven. She decides to play an acoustic cover of Creep by Radiohead, and while it is similarly an expression of immediate remorse, the sheer agony in her voice is the culmination of a lifetime. Growing up, Alex and Gabe didn't have the healthiest relationship with their father. It was their mother who often had to mediate. And so, when she began to succumb to an illness, she regretted not being there to keep the family together. To ensure her dying peacefully, Alex promised to look after them in her stead. Nonetheless, the fighting refused to stop. Their lack of finances made it worse, and eventually, despite Alex's pleas, their father gave up on them. The siblings had to be separated, with Alex sent to foster care and Gabe sent to juvie. It broke my heart to see her try so hard to keep them together. Even in foster care, she wrote letters to her father. She was so young at the time, it was completely out of her control. But in her mind, she broke her promise, and it was her fault they fell apart. The guilt was so damaging that she repressed the memories of her last moments with both of her parents. That's why when Typhon's negligence kills Gabe, she needs them to be held accountable. Even against a corporation, she can't let it go. She still feels like it is her responsibility. Her years in the foster care system were when her powers started to develop and would only end up serving as a burden. Alex was trapped in a vicious cycle. Her mental health issues led to neglect, and neglect led to another foster home. And yet all that awaited her was a dysfunctional setting that enveloped her in negativity. Feeling the rage of people like Tessa forced her to learn how to fight, and feeling Isabel's depression prevented her from saving her life. Mari and many others stopped replying because she was too much to handle, and Isaac was cut off for taking advantage of her vulnerability. Even Dr. Lin, a psychiatrist who was immensely supportive, was promptly blocked as soon as she left for Haven. Creep isn't a mere descriptor of who she's perceived to be, nor is it just the image of herself in the mirror. It is a recitation of her ostracism, both against her will and of her own volition.
In the second home, one of the other kids committed suicide. And I couldn't eat for a month. After a couple of weeks in the fifth home, I got so depressed that my new parents sent me to a hospital. I never saw him again. The hurt follows me everywhere. It's the other kids get adopted, leave the system. Not me. They never picked me.
Though Gabe is a warm welcome, Alex's anxiety and panic disorders are perceptible the moment she steps foot in Haven. She has trouble maintaining eye contact, her fingers are prone to trembling, and she tends to grab her arm as if she's putting her guard up. What resonates with me personally is if the player chooses a sassy or excited dialogue option, she appears to regret her behavior almost instantly. Not that she doesn't mean it, but she doesn't want to embarrass herself or offend. She doesn't want to scare anyone else away. But after she harnesses her empathy just enough to rescue Ethan, she slowly but surely has a change in perspective. In the words of her journal, this is who you can be if you want to be. Someone who helps people, someone who understands that whatever else I am, I could at least offer this one thing to those who need it. Thanks to her sessions with Dr. Lin, Alex is capable of composing herself and uses that knowledge to offer relief. She will always prioritize making them feel understood and validated. It is second nature to her at this point. Her empathy will then provide a general idea on what to do next, but what is most powerful about it is the excuse to gain confidence. Even disregarding the supernatural, Alex is an incredibly expressive individual. When she's nervous or sad, it's written all over. When she's confident, she no longer cares if it's embarrassing or spontaneous. She will put everything into it. The truth is, Alex is playful at heart. Her interactions with Steph make this abundantly clear, from her showboating at foosball to her role-playing seduction that locks me in the tightest of chokeholds. But her sweetest friendship has to be with Ethan. From the get-go, Alex connected with him through comic books. There's a childlike wonder when she's deciphering his art, which gave me the confidence for her performance at the LARP. Many of us will feel nostalgic for reliving our childhood, but for Alex, she is living the childhood she never got to have. For a long time, she had accepted that she would only get to know people through their pain. But it is her efforts and her enjoyments that finally grants the opportunity to share someone else's happiness.
But even though I only had one day with him, he changed my life. I said I didn't know if I belonged here. He told me that home isn't something you find. It's something you build.
However, Alex's control over her powers isn't the end of her battle with them. In a community left with grief, she is compelled to put them before herself. She is the person whose grief is most justified, yet she's quickly drawn to others instead. It is so difficult for her to resist when she can empathize that easily and that strongly. The line between her and other people is blurred. Their business is her business. She needs to set boundaries. And that's exactly what most of the decisions are about. She is conflicted on where those boundaries should be, when she should cross them, and to what extent is appropriate. Is it her obligation to speak up? Is her attention warranted? Is her help even wanted? By constantly getting involved in other emotions, it becomes harder for her to understand her own. And so, when all the dust has settled, there's no festivities to be had. Just a girl on her bed. A girl who was so focused on solving a mystery that she never considered what was next for her. This is by no means an epiphany. Alex had been deliberately avoiding that topic as she dreads the mere thought of it. She is very much into the now. It's not like the past has given her hope, so she tries to savor the present as much as possible. Hence why she comforts herself by saying, "I'm okay," rather than thinking, "I will." Even her tattoo is symbolic. It's ambiguous on whether it's a rising or falling star. It just depends on how she feels at the moment. The case may be closed, but that doesn't equal closure. She has suddenly lost her purpose, with the only certainty being she misses her brother. But leave it to Gabe to offer two suggestions in spirit: to stay in Haven or to venture out. On one hand, Alex has more than earned a stable, peaceful life. There's no rush or urgency. She may have been overthinking all along. On the other hand, perhaps it's time to stand on her own instead of lingering on what Gabe left behind. She now has the chance of self-discovery, one that's not guided by anyone other than herself. This has been a long-awaited crossroads. For once, she has the freedom of choosing between multiple promising outcomes. And yet, that unfamiliar agency is exactly what makes it frightening. She's been saddled with burdens for so long that she lost all confidence in deciding for herself. I couldn't have felt any different though. This was the happiest I've ever been to play as Alex. I may not be an empath, but I've seen her overcome a spectrum of emotions. The distress of a poor, broken family, the despondency of neglect over her past and mental disorders, the remorse of hurting others with emotional outbursts, the dejection of being ostracized, the laments of not deserving company, the shame of lacking the emotional capacity to be with others, the self-doubt of being given progress rather than deserving it, the melancholy of others moving on while she merely remains, the desperation of needing somewhere to belong, and the fear of having no future. Whether or not she was correct about any of that is irrelevant. All that matters is she felt it, and still, she's okay. For me, this may have been the easiest decision of all, not because I was confident in what was right for her, but because either way, I was confident in her. She may not be sure of who she will be, but her time at Haven showed me and everyone else just who the hell she is. She is someone I know I'd fall in love with, someone I'd want to be like if I was born a girl, someone who changed me for the better even if I wasn't. I see enough of me in her to not feel beneath, yet in every divergence I can't help but look up to her. Alexandra Chen isn't just a girl who feels too much, who cares too much, and who has been through way too much. She is an inspiration who, despite everything, chooses to believe in others in spite of their vulnerable selves, allowing them the joy of her own unapologetic self. And by doing so, she had already been building the home she thought she'd never find.
Cold waves that pull you under. Oh, onto daylight and to thunder. When you take all lows, let the rain flow. You gotta take, you gotta take, you gotta take on every wave. Take on